Welcome to the weird world of medieval law. Hello there, sleepy traveler. Welcome to another perfectly boring journey through history, where the past is strange, the laws make no sense, and yawning is highly encouraged. Tonight, we're heading back to medieval Europe, a time of knights and castles. Yes, but also of really weird rules. We're talking about a world where pigs could be put on trial, where bread had to follow royal regulations, and where wearing the wrong color could get you fined. So, get cozy, snuggle under your blanket, and let your brain slowly power down while we tiptoe through the legal labyrinth of the Middle Ages. No need to stay alert. Trust me, by the time we get to the animal trials, you'll be halfway asleep. But first, let's set the scene, a land of lords, laws, and confusing. Medieval Europe wasn't exactly one big, happy kingdom. It was more like a messy quilt, made up of dozens of mini-kingdoms, duchies, city-states, and a few confused baronies thrown in for good measure. And every one of them had its own set of laws. Some made sense, many did not. See, back then, laws weren't really about logic or fairness. They were more like a mix of superstition, power flexes, and let's see what happens if we ban that. Also, most people couldn't read, so nobody really knew all the laws anyway. You just hoped the town crier wouldn't shout your name. Lawmakers with interesting priorities know who made these laws. Kings, queens, noblemen, bishops, popes, mayors, and sometimes just the loudest guy in the room. Laws were often created not to protect people, but to protect power, or money, or the local ale industry. You'll see, for example, if a noble didn't like people wearing silk, boom, new law, no silk unless you're rich. If someone blamed a goat for stealing their grain, someone else might decide goats need to be taken to court next time. Yes, really, the rulebook back then was less legal code and more vibes-based guidelines. Why were the laws so weird? Let's be honest, medieval folks were doing their best, considering they didn't have science, electricity, or even toothpaste. The world was confusing and scary. Plagues popped up, crops failed. Pigeons gave people the side eye. So when things went wrong, people looked for answers anywhere they could. In religion, in nature, in superstition. Or in the nearest pig. So laws evolved to deal with problems in the most medieval ways possible. Someone got sick. Must be witches. Someone stole bread. Time for public shame. Someone wore purple. Lock them up. That's a royal color. Peasant. We'll get into all that soon. But first, a brief word on justice. Justice, medieval style. Trial and error, mostly error. Let's say you're living in a medieval village. One day, your neighbor accuses you of stealing his cow. You say you didn't. He says you did. There's no camera footage, no DNA test, no lawyer with fancy objections. So how do they solve it? Easy. They might make you walk barefoot across burning coals. If your feet don't blister, you're innocent. If they do, guilty. It was called trial by ordeal. Yes, we're serious. And yes, we'll talk about that in Chapter 2, that kind of justice, based on pain, luck, or whatever the priest says, was weirdly normal for hundreds of years, and it wasn't just for crimes. There were laws about fashion, food, bedtime, and even how long your shoes could be. Yes, your shoes, but more on that later. The fun side of medieval law. No, we're not here to judge medieval folks. Well, maybe just a little, but really, we're here to marvel at how creative, and sometimes downright absurd, their laws could be. There was something oddly human about it all. People trying to make sense of the world by writing rules, even if the rules made no sense. It's kind of sweet, in a chaotic way. Of course, if you lived back then, it wasn't always fun. Mess up one time, and you might end up in the stocks, wearing a shame mask shaped like a donkey. Yes, that was a real punishment. Yes, it will be in Chapter 13. Why this makes great sleep material? No, you might be wondering, why am I falling asleep to medieval law? Simple, because nothing says, relaxing like centuries-old rules about bread weight and pigeon bands. It's dry, it's mildly ridiculous, and it asks absolutely nothing of your brain. You don't have to remember names or follow a plot. You just let the odd little facts wash over you like a warm bath of nonsense. And honestly, it works. Hundreds of years ago, people were making up laws to control candle usage. Tonight, you're using candles for mood lighting while learning about them. That's progress. What's coming up in the chapters ahead? We'll be diving into why pigs sometimes had to stand trial for murder, how your shoes could get you arrested, what happened if you brewed a bad batch of ale, and why medieval people thought bathing was dangerous. Spoiler, they were kind of right, for the wrong reasons. Each law we cover will be like a cozy, confusing bedtime story from long ago. You'll laugh a little, blink a lot, and before you know it, you'll be snoring gently like a peasant after a long day of not touching the king's dear. So lie back. Relax. You don't need to memorize anything. There will be no test. Just let the soft hum of medieval madness lull you into sleep. History doesn't have to be exciting. In fact, the more boring and bizarre it is, the better it is for bedtime. Trial by ordeal. Guilty until burned. Welcome back. Sleepy soul. Still with me. That's impressive. If you drifted off during the last chapter, congratulations. The system works. If you're still awake, don't worry. We're about to dive into something so wonderfully bizarre and backwards that your brain might just give up and fall asleep out of confusion. Tonight's topic, trial by ordeal. Also known as medieval courtrooms were just adult versions of playground dares. Justice. Let's see what the fire thinks so. Imagine you're living in a little medieval village. You've done your chores. You've paid your taxes or dodged them. I won't judge. And then, bam, someone accuses you of stealing their goat. You swear you didn't do it. But there's a problem. No fingerprints, no cameras, no lie detectors. Just your word against theirs. So, what does the town do? Well, instead of investigating, the villagers shrug and say, "Let's ask God." And how do you ask God? Medieval style. You make the accused do something horrible, and hope divine intervention steps in. That's trial by ordeal, justice by pain, luck, and a whole lot of superstition. The hot iron test. Handle with caution. Literally, one of the classics was the ordeal of hot iron. Here's how it worked. You were given a red-hot iron bar to carry, sometimes for a few steps, sometimes farther. Then your hand was wrapped up and left for a few days. If it healed cleanly, congratulations, you were innocent. If it got infected or blistered, guilty. Clearly, the heavens had spoken through second-degree burns. You might be wondering, wait, wouldn't everyone get burned? Yes, they would. But medieval people believed that if you were truly innocent, God would protect you from harm. So basically, walk through fire, hope for a miracle. I don't know about you, but if I were on trial, I'd take a nap and hope I snored through the whole thing. Trial by water. The medieval pool party no one enjoyed. Another crowd favorite was the ordeal by water. Sounds relaxing, Right, like a nice bath. Nope. In this one, you were tied up and tossed into a river or lake. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, you were innocent. Let that sink in. Literally, they believed that water, being pure, would reject a guilty person, causing them to float. Meanwhile, the innocent would sink because they were accepted by the holy element. Which makes no sense, of course, because floating is just physics. So your best case scenario. You sink and prove your innocence, then hope someone pulls you out before you drown. Worst case, you float and get declared a witch, a thief, or whatever else they didn't like that week. No life jackets allowed. Boiling water and broken bones. Deluxe edition. Some trials got even fancier. Ever heard of the cauldron test? You'd stick your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone from the bottom. Afterward, they'd inspect your skin to see how fast it healed. Sound familiar? That's right. Just like the hot iron ordeal. Except this one came with soup. Others involved walking barefoot across hot plowshares, sticking your arm in flames, or breaking bones to test your honor. Spoiler, it didn't feel very honorable. It's like they looked at pain and said, let's make that our justice system. Who came up with this stuff? You might be asking, who on earth invented this nonsense? Well, blame a mix of early Christian beliefs and leftover pagan traditions. The idea was simple: God will protect the innocent. But here's the twist: it wasn't just random villagers coming up with this. These were official court-sanctioned methods. Priests were often the ones overseeing these ordeals. Imagine your local clergyman lighting the fire while mumbling a prayer. Not exactly comforting. Even worse, people accepted it. If someone survived a trial, folks didn't say, "Wow, that guy's tough." They said, "Clearly, he's innocent." God said so. Did anyone ever win? Yes, kind of. Sometimes, the accused would go through the ordeal and miraculously come out with little or no injury. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe the priest was sympathetic. Maybe the iron wasn't that hot after all. There were even stories of people floating during the water ordeal and still being declared innocent because, quote, the rope was tied wrong. So, in a weird way, there was a tiny chance you could make it out okay if the gods, the fire, the priest, and the townspeople were all in a good mood. Not exactly comforting odds. The slow fade out of ordeals. Eventually, people started asking questions like, why are we boiling people to find out who stole a chicken? What if fire and water aren't the best legal tools? Can we maybe try? Evidence? By the 13th century, the church started stepping back from these trials. Priests were banned from participating. Slowly, courts began moving towards something more rational, or at least, less fiery. Trials by ordeal faded out, not because they stopped being weird, but because people finally noticed they weren't exactly fair, or useful, or humane. Still, they stuck around in some places for centuries. Because let's be honest, medieval Europe was not in a rush to modernize anything. A warm, burning reflection looking back, it's kind of amazing. These trials were brutal. Yes, but they were also deeply human. People were desperate for truth. In a world that didn't have science, detectives, or true crime podcasts. So they put their faith in symbols, in fire, water, wounds, hoping that some invisible force would show them the way. And sure, it seems ridiculous now, but in the moment, it probably felt like the best option they had. Still, I'd rather take a parking ticket, drift off, guilt-free. So now you know. If you lived in medieval Europe and someone accused you of stealing a sheep, your best bet was to pray, grab an oven mitt, and hope the village healer had some ointment. But tonight, you don't need to worry about hot irons or deep rivers. The animal trials, when pigs went to Corthello again. Sleepy listener, you're doing amazing. Still drifting, still yawning, still learning things no one asked for but somehow can't look away from. And tonight's tale, oh, it's a good one, because, tonight, we put pigs on trial? Literally, welcome to the medieval courtroom where the accused squeals instead of speaks, and sometimes, the witnesses do, yes, in medieval Europe, animals could, and did, go to court with judges, and witnesses, and even lawyers. Don't worry if your brain just said, wait, what? That's a normal reaction. Just take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's explore one of history's strangest legal traditions, in the most relaxing way possible. So, who's the defendant today? Let's paint a picture. It's the year 1386. You're in a little French village. The townspeople are gathered, the judge is robed, and the jury is ready. There's a hush in the courtroom as the accused is brought in. On a leash. It's a pig. A large sow. Her crime? Murder? Yes, murder. Of a 3-month-old child. No less. She stands trial, is found guilty, and, I kid you not, is sentenced to death by hanging. The town even dresses her in a little human outfit before the execution. Because, you know. Justice. And no, this wasn't some weird one-off. Pigs were regulars in medieval courtrooms. The logic behind the madness. So. Why? Well, medieval people took the idea of moral order very seriously. Everything had its place, and when something broke the rules, it had to be punished. That included people, and occasionally, animals. The belief was that if an animal hurt a human, especially a child, it had committed a moral offense, not just a physical one. It had broken God's law, not just man's, and in a world where religion, law, and superstition were all tangled up like medieval shoelaces, that made perfect sense. To them. Anyway, pigs were the most common criminals. No, you may be wondering, why pigs? Why not cows or chickens? Well, pigs were basically free-range roommates back then. They roamed the village, snuffled through the streets, and were often found near children. Pigs were strong, curious, and sometimes surprisingly aggressive, especially if provoked or scared. So every now and then, tragedy struck, a pig hurt someone, or worse. And instead of saying, this was an accident, the villagers said, this pig must face the law. Some towns even hired lawyers to represent the pig? Yes, paid lawyers, arguing on behalf of their oinking clients. Somewhere, there's a medieval lawyer who proudly said, I defended a pig, and I won. Other criminal creatures. It wasn't just pigs, though. Medieval courts saw all kinds of accused animals. Goats, for alleged lewd behavior. Rats, for stealing grain and spreading disease. Locusts, for destroying crops. Roosters, for laying eggs. Long story. In one bizarre case, a group of beetles was summoned to court because they were ruining vineyards. The judge gave them a chance to leave peacefully. When they didn't, a formal curse was issued. Yes, they cursed the bugs. It was the insect version of a cease and desist letter. The court process, snouts and sentences. No, if you think these were just symbolic events, like little rituals, think again. These were full-on legal proceedings. A charge would be filed, a trial date would be set, a judge and jury would gather. The animal might be kept in a holding cell. Evidence was presented. Witnesses were called. A verdict was reached. If guilty, punishment followed, sometimes hanging, sometimes burning, sometimes exile. Yes, exile, as if the pig had somewhere else to be. In rare cases, the animal was acquitted, which honestly thus makes it weirder. Medieval lawyers arguing for a rat's freedom of. The most famous animal lawyers was a guy named Bartholomew Chassigny. In the 1500s, he defended a group of rats who were charged with eating up all the barley in a French town. He argued, with a straight face, that the rats had not been properly summoned. The journey to court was dangerous due to cats. Therefore, the rats were unable to appear. Shockingly. The judge accepted the excuse. Imagine being so good at law that you convince a court that your rat clients couldn't come to trial because of neighborhood cats. This is either genius or peak absurdity, or both. What did people really believe? It's hard to say exactly what everyone thought. Some folks probably took it all very seriously, especially the church, which liked the symbolism of restoring order and punishing sin. Others might have just gone along with it because well, it's what the town did. Remember, this was a time before modern science, psychology, or even basic common sense and law. Blaming the pig might have felt safer than blaming, say, a careless adult, or admitting that life was unpredictable and sad things happened. By punishing the animal, they were trying to fix the moral balance of the world. It's weird. It's dark. It's oddly human. The fade out of Fermiard just to see eventually, as Europe crawled into the Renaissance and beyond, animal trials started to fade. People began to realize that maybe, just maybe, animals didn't have moral intent, because they're animals. By the 1700s, animal trials were mostly a thing of the past, but they left behind a legacy so strange, you almost can't believe it was real. And yet it was. There are surviving court records, paintings, eyewitness accounts, all confirming that yes, for several hundred years, a pig could be charged with murder and hanged in the town square. Let that gently swirl around your brain as you drift toward sleep. One last squeal for the road, so next time you see a pig, in a movie, or on a farm, or maybe just in your dreams, give it a little nod. Somewhere in piggy heaven, there's a whole group of medieval sows who stood trial and made legal history. And somewhere deep in your now very sleepy brain, a tiny voice whispers, "Thank goodness I live in a time where animals don't need lawyers." The animal trials, when pigs went to court. Again, sleepy listener, you're doing amazing. Still drifting, still yawning, still learning things no one asked for but somehow can't look away from. And tonight's tale, oh, it's a good one, because, tonight, we put pigs on trial? Literally. Welcome to the medieval courtroom, where the accused squeals instead of speaks, and sometimes, the witnesses do, yes, in medieval Europe, animals could, and did, go to court with judges, and witnesses, and even lawyers. Don't worry if your brain just said, "Wait, what?" That's a normal reaction. Just take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's explore one of history's strangest legal traditions. In the most relaxing way possible. So, who's the defendant today? Let's paint a picture. It's the year 1386. You're in a little French village. The townspeople are gathered, the judge is robed, and the jury is ready. There's a hush in the courtroom as the accused is brought in. On a leash. It's a pig. A large sow. Her crime? Murder? Yes, murder. Of a 3-month-old child. No less. She stands trial. is found guilty, and, I kid you not, is sentenced to death by hanging. The town even dresses her in a little human outfit before the execution. Because, justice. And no, this wasn't some weird one-off. Pigs were regulars in medieval courtrooms. The logic behind the madness, why? Well, medieval people took the idea of moral order very seriously. Everything had its place, and when something broke the rules, it had to be punished. That included people, and occasionally, animals. The belief was that if an animal hurt a human, especially a child, it had committed a moral offense, not just a physical one. It had broken God's law, not just man's, and in a world where religion, law, and superstition were all tangled up like medieval shoelaces, that made perfect sense to them. Anyway, pigs were the most common criminals. No, you may be wondering, why pigs? Why not cows or chickens? Well, pigs were basically free-range roommates back then. They roamed the village, snuffled through the streets, and were often found near children. Pigs were strong, curious, and sometimes surprisingly aggressive, especially if provoked or scared. So every now and then, tragedy struck, a pig hurt someone, or worse. And instead of saying, "This was an accident," the villagers said, "This pig must face the law." Some towns even hired lawyers to represent the pig? Yes, paid lawyers, arguing on behalf of their oinking clients. Somewhere, there's a medieval lawyer who proudly said, "I defended a pig, and I won." Other criminal creatures. It wasn't just pigs, though. Medieval courts saw all kinds of accused animals. Goats, for alleged lewd behavior. Rats, for stealing grain and spreading disease. Locusts, for destroying crops. Roosters, for laying eggs. Long story. In one bizarre case, a group of beetles was summoned to court because they were ruining vineyards. The judge gave them a chance to leave peacefully. When they didn't, a formal curse was issued. Yes, they cursed the bugs. It was the insect version of a cease and desist letter. The court process, snouts and sentences. No, if you think these were just symbolic events, like little rituals, think again. These were full-on legal proceedings. A charge would be filed, a trial date would be set, a judge and jury would gather. The animal might be kept in a holding cell. Evidence was presented. Witnesses were called. A verdict was reached. If guilty, punishment followed, sometimes hanging, sometimes burning, sometimes exile. Yes, exile, as if the pig had somewhere else to be. In rare cases, the animal was acquitted, which honestly makes it weirder. Medieval lawyers arguing for a rat's freedom. Of the most famous animal lawyers was a guy named Bartholomew Chassaigny. In the 1500s, he defended a group of rats who were charged with eating up all the barley in a French town. He argued, with a straight face, that the rats had not been properly summoned. The journey to court was dangerous due to cats. Therefore, the rats were unable to appear. Shockingly. The judge accepted the excuse. Imagine being so good at law that you convince a court that your rat clients couldn't come to trial because of neighborhood cats. This is either genius or peak absurdity, or both. What did people really believe? It's hard to say exactly what everyone thought. Some folks probably took it all very seriously, especially the church, which liked the symbolism of restoring order and punishing sin. Others might have just gone along with it because well, it's what the town did. Remember, this was a time before modern science, psychology, or even basic common sense in law. Blaming the pig might have felt safer than blaming, say, a careless adult. Or admitting that life was unpredictable and sad things happened. By punishing the animal, they were trying to fix the moral balance of the world. It's weird. It's dark. It's oddly human. The fade out of farmyard just to see eventually, as Europe crawled into the Renaissance and beyond, animal trials started to fade. People began to realize that maybe, just maybe, animals didn't have moral intent, because they're animals. By the 1700s, animal trials were mostly a thing of the past. But they left behind a legacy so strange, you almost can't believe it was real. And yet it was. There are surviving court records, paintings, eyewitness accounts, all confirming that yes, for several hundred years, a pig could be charged with murder and hanged in the town square. Let that gently swirl around your brain as you drift towards sleep. One last squeal for the road, so next time you see a pig, in a movie, or on a farm, or maybe just in your dreams, give it a little nod. Somewhere in piggy heaven, there's a whole group of medieval sows who stood trial and made legal history. And somewhere deep in your now very sleepy brain, a tiny voice whispers, "Thank goodness I live in a time where animals don't need lawyers. Curfew bells and candle rules. Welcome back, night owl, or maybe sleepy squirrel." Either way, I see you're still here, still listening, still gliding through the soft, strange world of medieval laws. Tonight's chapter is especially cozy because it's all about bedtime. Yep. In medieval Europe, there were actual laws about when you had to go to sleep, and how much light you could use once the sun went down. Forget Netflix. Forget scrolling on your phone at 2 a.m. in the Middle Ages. If the curfew bell rang, you were expected to shut it all down. Literally, no candles, no chatting, no just one more page. The day was done. So, lie back, pull the covers up, and let's explore the part of history that basically invented lights out. First, what is a curfew? The word curfew comes from the old French couvre-feu, which means cover the fire. And no, it wasn't just a fun phrase for tucking in your campfire. It was an actual law. When the bell rang, usually from the church tower, it meant every household had to put out their flames, cover their hearths, and go to bed. Why? A few reasons. Fire safety. Medieval homes were mostly wood, straw, and good intentions. 1. Unattended candle could burn the whole village down. Crime control. Nighttime was when the shady stuff happened. Theft, sneaking around, mysterious goat disappearances. Order and obedience. If you can tell people when to go to bed, you're pretty much in charge of everything. So the nightly curfew bell wasn't just a suggestion. It was a legal bedtime reminder from your local lord, mayor, or king. The sound that meant time to sleep. Picture it. You're in a medieval town. It's late afternoon. The sun is dipping behind the hills. Chickens are settling in. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammers one last horseshoe. Then gong g. The curfew bell rings. Loud, echoing through cobbled streets and mossy rooftops. It's time. Everyone knows what it means. Children stop playing. Markets close. Inns start dimming their lanterns. At home, your mother throws a lid over the fireplace, and your father mutters about the price of wax. It's bedtime, because the law says so. And if you're caught wandering the streets afterward, that's suspicious. You could be fined. Or worse, questioned. The candle conundrum. No. Here's where things get even more bedtimey. You weren't just told when to sleep. You were also told how much light you were allowed to use after dark. Candles were expensive. Wax didn't grow on trees. Well, technically, bees made it, and bees don't work for free. So having lots of candles was a sign of wealth. And waste. In some towns, there were actual laws limiting how many candles you could burn at night, how long they could stay lit, what kind of wax could be used, whether you could use a lamp instead of a candle. Ooh, fancy. Why the restrictions? Again, fire was a huge risk. And also, authorities didn't want people staying up too late, plotting revolts or writing moody poetry. Which means, if you were caught with an extra candle at night, you might get a knock on the door. Excuse me, sir, are you illegally cozy? Inns, alehouses, and after hours trouble, not everyone wanted to sleep at the sound of a bell. Some folks, especially in cities, like staying out late at alehouses or public inns. This became a problem. So, curfews were often stricter in towns than in villages. Guards patrolled the streets. Anyone out past curfew needed a permit, or a really good excuse. I was on my way to feed my cousin's goat might not cut it. People who broke curfew could be fined, jailed, sent home by force, or just publicly scolded by the town watchman, which, frankly, was worse than jail. Candle crimes and medieval life hacks. Let's take a moment to appreciate how sneaky people were. Some clever folks found ways to bend the rules without actually breaking them. For example, they'd cover the fireplace, but not fully put it out, so it looked like they obeyed the law while secretly staying warm. They'd hide candles behind thick pottery, letting just enough glow peek through to keep reading or sewing. Or they'd use animal fat lamps instead of wax candles. Technically not banned. Just smelly. It was the medieval version of turning the TV volume way down so your parents don't hear. Humans never change. Royal exceptions, of course. Now, let's not pretend everyone had to obey the rules. The rich and noble classes were often exempt from curfews. If you lived in a castle, you could burn all the candles you wanted. Torches, chandeliers, fire pits in every room. No one was checking your wax levels. Plus, you had guards, stone walls, and very little chance of setting your manor on fire accidentally. The rules were for the common folk, the ones who had thatched roofs and wooden floors and no dragons to protect them. The sleep schedule of the past hangs to curfews and candle laws. Medieval people had a very different approach to sleep than we do now. Instead of one long sleep, they often did what's called segmented sleep. First sleep, right after sunset, until around midnight. Second sleep, after a short waking period, for prayer, reflection, or sneaky snacks. They'd sleep again until dawn. It sounds weird, but many people found it peaceful. The in-between time was calm, quiet, and kind of magical, and since there weren't TikToks or text messages, no one minded the break. Maybe they were onto something. A gentle yawn through time. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? A whole village falling asleep together, the church bell echoing across fields. Candles flickering out, fires being covered, people whispering good night in stone houses. Even the goats settled down. Sure, it was inconvenient. A little controlling, definitely flammable. But in a strange way, those laws created a shared rhythm of life, a bedtime routine for an entire society. And tonight, as you listen to this, from your soft bed, lit by a perfectly safe little light, you're part of that same long tradition of sleepy humans, winding down after a long day. No bathing allowed. The dirt on hygiene lost. Welcome back, my brave little bedtime historian. So far, you survived curfews, fashion restrictions, and trials involving pigs. But tonight, we're diving into something that might make you wrinkle your nose gently, of course, because in this chapter, we're talking about medieval hygiene laws, and more specifically, the strange, dusty, and occasionally downright stinky rules about bathing. Spoiler alert, people in the Middle Ages were not fans of showers, not because they didn't like feeling clean but because, somehow, cleanliness got suspicious. So fluff your pillow, breathe in that sweet modern soap smell, and let's take a relaxing, non-watery stroll through the dirty side of history. Medieval bath time, not what you think first. Let's clear up a myth. Medieval people did bathe. Sometimes. In fact, there were public bathhouses in many cities across Europe, especially during the early Middle Ages. These weren't your average shower stalls. They were more like saunas mixed with spas, with hot water, steam rooms, and communal soaking tubs. People would go to relax, socialize, and, occasionally, wash their armpits. Sounds nice, right? Well, not everyone thought so. Bathhouses, relaxation or sin dens. As the centuries rolled on, public bathhouses developed a reputation, not just as places to clean up. But as places where things got a little, shall we say, steamy in more ways than one. Rumors spread that bathhouses were hotbeds of immorality, places where men and women mingled, gossiped, and sometimes got a little too cozy in the tub. By the 14th and 15th centuries, authorities began cracking down. In some towns, bathhouses were regulated. In others, they were shut down completely. Why? Because if there's one thing medieval lawmakers feared more than dirty fingernails, it was fun. When bathing was banned in certain cities, it became illegal to operate or visit public baths, especially during religious holidays, after dark, or if the local bishop was in a particularly grumpy mood. And in some places, bathing itself was seen as risky behavior. Why? Here comes the weird part. Water will make you sick. The medieval belief. Many people genuinely believed that bathing was dangerous, not because of the water itself, but because it could open your pores and let in bad stuff like illness, corrupt air, miasma, which basically meant bad vibes in gas form. The logic went like this: if you're warm, wet, and exposed, your body becomes vulnerable. So the safest option, stay dirty. Think of it as a protective coating of grime. Yes, dirt was health insurance. The soap situation, no. Some folks did try to stay clean in their own way, but options were limited. Soap was often homemade and smelled like disappointment. It was made with animal fat, wood ash, and sometimes urine. Yes, really, for that extra tingle. Imported soap from places like Spain was expensive and smelled slightly better, so it was mostly for the rich. The average person washed their face and hands occasionally, maybe soaked their feet once a week, and called it a day. Armpits, optional. Hygiene laws. The rules of grime. With all this confusion about cleanliness, some cities made laws about how and how often people could wash. For example, in 14th century Paris, bathhouses were closed during Lent because being clean apparently made you less holy. In London, people were fined for washing clothes in the river during certain hours, not because it was dirty, but because it got in the way of boat traffic. In Cologne, Germany, barbers and bathhouse workers were strictly licensed and forbidden to offer unauthorized scrubbing. Imagine getting arrested for exfoliating without permission, smelling like a saint, or trying to without regular bathing. people turned to other methods to stay fresh. Herbs and flowers were stuffed into clothing, rosemary, lavender, or just whatever grew nearby. Perfume sachets were worn around the neck. Some folks even carried oranges filled with cloves to sniff whenever things got too funky, and if that failed, everyone kind of stank together, a bonding experience, in its own awful way. The church ways in church had mixed feelings about cleanliness. On one hand, being clean was associated with purity. On the other hand, enjoying a warm bath too much could be seen as sinful indulgence. So religious leaders often encouraged spiritual cleanliness over physical cleanliness. You might not have washed your hair in weeks, but if you confessed your sins and avoided temptation, you are technically squeaky clean in God's eyes, and isn't that comforting? In a slightly itchy way. When plagues hit, things got stranger during outbreaks like the Black Death. Hygiene panic went into overdrive. Some doctors warned against any bathing because it weakened the body. Others recommended washing in vinegar and rose water, which sounds nice until you realize you're basically marinating. Some cities banned public bathing entirely during plagues, which, honestly, might have been the only time that made sense. Meanwhile, others did the opposite. They soaked in mercury baths to stay healthy. Spoiler: mercury is not healthy. A brief shower of gratitude. So here we are, in the modern age, with hot showers, fluffy towels, gentle lavender soap, and plumbing that doesn't involve a wooden bucket and a very suspicious puddle. And tonight, as you drift off to sleep, take a moment to feel grateful for how wonderfully clean you are, or at least, how clean you could be if you wanted to. You are not breaking any hygiene laws. You are not banned from bathing. You do not need a license to use shampoo. You, dear listener, are free to smell as lovely as you please. Breadcrumbs and ale. Tessa, welcome back, bedtime adventurer. You made it through the filth and funk of medieval hygiene laws. And now you've earned a snack. But be careful, because in the Middle Ages, even bread and beer came with strict rules, and breaking them could land you in serious trouble. That's right, you could be fined, punished, or even pilloried for selling a soggy loaf or watery brew. This is the tale of breadcrumbs and ale justice, where bakers were watched, brewers were tested, and carbs were complicated. So tuck in tight, grab an imaginary mug of medieval ale, non-alcoholic, of course, and let's drift through a yeasty chapter of history. Bread was a big deal. Bread wasn't just food in medieval Europe. It was life. For most people, especially peasants, bread made up the bulk of their daily calories. A poor family might eat bread 3 times a day, every day, for the rest of their lives. No sourdough starters, no croissants, just dense, sometimes dry, sometimes rock-hard bread, which meant, if you messed with the bread, you messed with the people. So of course, the government got involved. The assize of bread and ale. That's not a spell from Harry Potter. The assize of bread and ale was an actual law passed in England in 1266. It regulated 2 things: the price of bread and ale, the quality of bread and albecas. If you were overcharging for a tiny loaf, or watering down your beer, you weren't just being greedy. You were practically committing treason against dinner. The law set specific weights and measures for loaves and pints. Every time the cost of grain changed, bakers had to adjust the size of their loaves to match, and if they didn't, things got interesting. Breadcrumb number 1. Underweight loaf. Selling bread that was too small, you'd be in trouble. Inspectors called breadweighers would patrol towns and markets, secretly measuring loaves. If yours came in light, you could be fined, or worse, thrown in the stocks. Sometimes, dishonest bakers would hollow out the middle of the loaf or mix in things like chalk or powdered peas to bulk it up. When caught, they weren't just punished, they were publicly shamed. Nothing says learn your lesson like being pelted with stale buns while tied to a wooden post. Bread crime number 2. The false crumb in some cases. Bakers tried to fake freshness, baking old dough, brushing it with water to make it look moist, or reheating leftovers. There were even accusations of using ground bones, sand, or animal hair to stretch the flour. Let's hope those were just rumors, but medieval customers didn't take chances. If your bread was suspiciously weird, they'd bring it to the bread court. Yes, that was a thing. Imagine Judge Judy, but with more flour and fewer commercials. The baker's dozen, not so generous. Ever wonder why a baker's dozen means 13 instead of 12? Well, it comes straight from this era. Bakers were so afraid of selling underweight bread that they often tossed in an extra roll or loaf, just to be safe. That way, if the inspector showed up, they couldn't be accused of cheating. A little preemptive generosity, or, more accurately, an edible insurance policy. So next time you get an extra donut for free, thank the medieval justice system. Now, onto the ale. If bread was important, ale was sacred. Water wasn't always safe to drink. It could be full of bacteria or, occasionally, floating things best left unnamed. So ale became the go-to beverage, even for children. It was low in alcohol, cheap, and easy to make. Sometimes too easy, which meant some brewers tried to cut corners. Ale crime number 1. Weak brew. Making your ale too watery was basically a crime. It was called false brewing, and it was taken very seriously. Just imagine, you come home after a long day of hauling hay, surviving pig trials, and avoiding candle inspectors. You sit down for a nice, frothy mug of ale. And it tastes like sad, soggy bread water. Unacceptable. Inspectors known as ale conners were hired to test ale across the village. Yes, their job was literally to go around drinking beer. But with a sense of justice. The ale trousers test. Yes, really, ale conners didn't just use their taste buds. They also used their pants. One method involved pouring a sample of ale on a wooden bench. Then, the conner would sit down, in leather trousers, and wait. If their trousers stuck to the bench, it meant the ale had enough sugar from malt, and passed the test. If they didn't stick, too watery, the brewer might be fined. Yes, people really sat in beer to make legal decisions, and here you are, thinking your job is weird. Ale crime number 2. Sneaky ingredients. Some brewers tried to cheat the system by adding herbs or chemicals to fake the right taste, but the Assize of Ale banned certain ingredients and required strict brewing standards. Selling bad ale wasn't just frowned upon. It could lead to public punishment. The worst brewers might be dragged through the town in a cart, forced to wear a barrel, or have their barrels smashed in front of them. Imagine your whole stock of IPA getting stomped by angry villagers. It was tough times for shady bartenders. Carbs, but make them legal. When you think of medieval laws, you might imagine kings, castles, or swords. But so many of the rules, the ones people cared about most, were about food, because food was survival. Food was daily life, and when food was bad, unfair, or dishonest, people got mad, which meant that every baker and brewer in town lived under the constant threat of a surprise inspection. No pressure. Dreamy thoughts of honest bread tonight. As you close your eyes and drift toward dreamland, imagine a peaceful medieval village, the smell of fresh bread in the air, the quiet burble of ale barrels behind the tavern, a sleepy ale conner strolling down the street, trousers slightly damp, very proud of his civic duty. It was a strange system. A crumb-covered, beer-soaked, deeply passionate system, but it kept people fed and kept things fair, at least most of the time. Swearing, gossip, and the sinful tongue. Welcome back, sleepy traveler. You survived bread crime, ale tests, and the hygiene horrors of centuries past. But tonight, we're taking on something a little more intimate. Not your feet, not your laundry, your mouth. Yes, in this chapter, we're diving into the fascinating and surprisingly strict world of medieval speech laws. Because in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just your actions that could get you punished. Your words could. So let your tongue rest safely in your mouth, close your eyes, and prepare to explore a world where gossip was a crime, and swearing might get you dunked in a river. Let's talk about talking. Thou shalt not talk smack. Medieval people may not have had smartphones, but they still gossiped. Oh, did they gossip? Village life was quiet, and when the most exciting thing all week was the miller dropping his sack of flour, people talked, and whispered. And pointed, and made things. Weird. But here's the twist, talking behind someone's back could get you in legal trouble. Gossip. Girls and boys gossip, especially among women, was seen as dangerous. Why? Because it disrupted the delicate social order of the village. If someone said that a local priest had a secret girlfriend, or that the blacksmith was watering down his wine, it could cause chaos, and the last thing a medieval town needed was a scandal about goats and marriage contracts. So, laws were put in place. Gossipers were called scolds, and scolding wasn't just annoying, it was a crime. A woman, yes, almost always a woman who gossiped too much could be punished publicly. Some men were scolded too. But let's be honest, the system was a little sexist. The scold's bridle, aka the medieval muzzle. One of the most chilling punishments was the scold's bridle, also known as the branks. Imagine a metal cage fitted over your head like a terrifying helmet. Inside, a small iron piece, kind of like a spoon, would press down on your tongue, making it painful or impossible to speak. That's right, a muzzle for your thoughts. Some bridles had bells on them, so everyone would hear you coming. It was the world's most medieval version of shame on you. Victims were paraded around town, wearing their scold's bridle while villagers stared, pointed, and probably gossiped about that too. Irony at its finest, dunking the loud mouths. Another punishment for scolding and swearing was dunking. And no, not the basketball kind. The guilty party would be tied to a wooden chair, attached to a long beam, and then lowered into a pond or river, over and over again. Splosh. This punishment was often called the cucking stool, which sounds silly, but to the person getting dunked, it was anything but. Sometimes the crowd would cheer, sometimes they'd throw things, and sometimes they just enjoyed the peaceful sound of justice bubbling in the water. Gossip never felt so soggy. Swear not, lest you be fined. No, let's talk about swearing. We're not just talking about F-bombs here. No, medieval swearing was often religious, invoking saints, the Virgin Mary, or even parts of Christ's body. This was called blasphemous oaths, and people took it very seriously. Saying by God's bones, or by Christ's nails, could land you with a fine, or worse, because it was seen as disrespecting the divine. In some regions, courts kept lists of common oaths and how much each one cost. By God's teeth, 3 pence by the Virgin's hair, 5 pence by all the saints and martyrs. Well, now you're just showing off. Repeat offenders were labeled habitual swearers, which sounds like a pirate insult, but was a real legal classification. Medieval censorship. But make it awkward. Local lords and church officials often ran moral courts, where people were summoned for using filthy language, naughty rhymes, or singing rude songs at festivals. Yes, even music wasn't safe. One poor guy in Yorkshire was punished in 1433 for singing a song that said more than was fitting about the vicar's wife. Whatever that means. Probably juicy. Definitely frowned upon. The shame paradelates say someone was caught gossiping or swearing in public. What then? Well, aside from bridles and dunkings, there were other creative punishments. Wearing a sign that said exactly what you said, which is pretty bold. Being forced to stand on a barrel in the middle of town, walking backward through the village, followed by a bell ringer announcing your shame. Sometimes you had to do it all barefoot, because medieval punishments always included a bonus foot injury, just for flair. But wait, people still talked. Here's the funny thing. Even with all these rules, people still gossiped, swore, and spread rumors. Because humans are humans, whether they wear tunics or TikToks. Some just got smarter about it. They whispered indoors. They invented secret hand gestures. They blamed their goats. Yes, really. And if all else failed, they claimed, I didn't say it, my cousin did. A timeless defense. Tongue troubled to die as you lie in bed, wrapped in soft blankets and far away from iron bridles and soggy justice. Take a moment to appreciate that freedom of speech is kind of a luxury. You can mutter to yourself. You can curse when you stub your toe. You can even whisper gossip to your cat without risking a public bath in a duck pond. Sure, people today still say dumb things, but at least they don't get fitted with the talking helmet of doom. Most of the time, whispered good night. So, dear listener, let your tongue rest easy. You've learned the truth about medieval mouths. Words had power. Words had weight. And sometimes, words had very wet consequences. Speak kindly, sleep deeply, and remember, if someone ever calls you a scold, just smile, roll over, and say, at least I didn't get dunked. Animal courtrooms and beastly trials. Tone, wonderfully weird, chill, and lightly humorous. Word count, approximately 1100 words. Chapter 9, Animal courtrooms and beastly trials. Settle in, bedtime wanderer. Tonight, we enter a realm that defies logic, common sense, and everything your cat believes about the legal system. We're talking about a time when animals were dragged into courtrooms and put on trial. Yes, real animals, with actual charges in front of actual judges, sometimes with lawyers, because, why not? So fluff your pillow, pet your pet unless it's a goose. They're up next, and prepare to explore the bizarre history of medieval animal trials. The pig did it. Let's begin with the animal that caused the most legal drama in medieval Europe. The pig. Pigs were everywhere, rooting around the streets, eating scraps, knocking over carts, doing pig things. But every now and then, a pig went rogue, and when it did, it could be arrested. One famous case took place in France in 1386, where a pig was accused of murdering a child. The pig was brought to court, found guilty, and executed. They even dressed it in human clothes for the trial, because apparently dignity was important for porcine criminals. Legal representation. For a rooster, here's where it gets even stranger. Some animals, especially in France and Switzerland, were given legal counsel. That's right, a lawyer. For a chicken, imagine walking into court and the defense lawyer stands up and says, "Your Honor, my client the goose pleads not guilty." He honked in self-defense. These weren't joke trials, either. The records were painstakingly written down. Testimonies were heard. Evidence was considered. Judges deliberated. All because someone thought the rooster was laying eggs and practicing witchcraft. That actually happened, by the way. And yes, the rooster was convicted, who was on trial. So, what kind of animals ended up in court? Pigs, for biting, trampling, or killing humans. Rats, for stealing grain and ruining crops. Goats, for lewd behavior, whatever that means. Roosters, for suspicious egg-laying. Dogs, for attacking people and even insects, like weevils and locusts, for crop destruction. The logic was simple. If an animal did harm, it should face justice. Although the whole idea of asking a beetle to appear in court is objectively hilarious. Bugs in the dock. You'd think insects would be spared. They're small. They don't wear pants. They can't exactly raise their right wing and swear to tell the truth. But medieval law had thoughts. If a swarm of weevils ate a farmer's grain, the farmer could petition the church to sue the weevils. They were summoned to court. Yes, literally, and told to vacate the land. In one case, when the bugs didn't show up, shocking, a priest was brought in to excommunicate them. Imagine standing in a field yelling Latin at a beetle. Medieval job description: pest control. With holy water. Animals and sin. We were people doing this. It all comes down to the medieval mindset. Animals weren't just seen as mindless beasts. They were part of God's world. And if they sinned, they had to be judged like any other creature. If a pig murdered someone, people didn't say, "Oops, pigs will pig." They said, "This pig is morally guilty." To the gallows. It was part religion, part law, and a whole lot of creative paperwork. Lawyers took this seriously. Some of these animal trials were highly formal. Court officials were present. Witnesses gave statements. And yes, the animal sometimes got a defense lawyer who would argue things like, the animal was provoked, the human was trespassing, the animal had no prior offenses, or, in one case, the rooster did not intend to lay an egg. A real lawyer, with a rope and everything, stood in front of a judge and delivered a defense speech. About a goat: you truly haven't lived until you've heard. Your Honor, my client is a simple swine. The verdict: guilty or banished. If the animal was found guilty, the punishment varied. Large animals like pigs or bulls were often executed, usually publicly. Small animals, like rats or frogs, were sometimes banished or excommunicated, because killing them all was impractical. Insects, hilariously, were sometimes offered alternate land, like, "Please go destroy this other field, not ours." No one knows if the bugs complied. But honestly, the confidence is inspiring. Animal rights. Sort of. In a strange way, giving animals trials showed that people saw them as moral beings, capable of guilt, innocence, and justice. It's twisted, sure, but also kind of oddly respectful. Today, we focus on animal welfare. Back then, they focused on animal accountability, even if it meant hiring a lawyer for a chicken. Imagine walking your dog past a medieval courthouse. You look over and say, "Don't chase that cat. I can't afford another trial." What did it achieve? Honestly, probably nothing. No weevil ever respected a court summons. No rooster stopped crowing after getting convicted. No pig learned their lesson. But in a world full of uncertainty, war, famine, disease, people craved order, and if order meant putting a goat on trial for dancing funny, So be it. Curl up with your pets as you drift off to sleep. Take one last look around your room. Is your cat purring peacefully? Is your dog curled at your feet? Is your hamster plotting? Don't worry, none of them will be facing trial anytime soon. But if they do, just promise you'll be their lawyer. Your Honor, my client is a very good boy. Fashion police and illegal outfits welcome back. Dreamer, you've braved bread inspections, beastly courtrooms, and buckets of public shame. But tonight, we're talking about something far more dangerous. Yes, in medieval Europe, what you wore wasn't just about looking good, it was about knowing your place. Because if you dressed too richly, too boldly, or, heaven forbid, above your station, you could find yourself in trouble with the fashion police. Not the stylish kind. The actual law-enforcing kind. So fluff your pillow, smooth your nightgown, and prepare to hear about a time when a fancy feather could cost you a fortune. Or your freedom. Dress like you mean it, but not too much. In the Middle Ages, society was obsessed with order. Everyone had a role: lords, peasants, merchants, monks, and they were expected to look the part. If you were a peasant, you wore simple wool. If you were a noble, you wore velvet, silk, fur, and maybe a little sparkle. But if a humble cobbler's apprentice strolled into church wearing fur-lined sleeves and golden embroidery, people noticed, and by noticed, I mean reported him to the authorities. That's because medieval Europe had something called sumptuary laws, and they were dead serious. Sumptuary what now? Sumptuary laws were rules that governed what you could or couldn't wear, based on your social class, wealth, and gender. They said things like, only nobles may wear silk, only knights may wear gold thread, women may not wear veils with pearls unless they are married to someone rich, no servant may wear shoes that curl up at the toe past 6 inches. Yes, that last one is real. Someone was measuring toes. These laws weren't just about keeping things tidy, they were about keeping people in their lane. Your clothing was basically a walking ID card, the forbidden fabric. So, what was considered too fancy for the common folk? Let's take a look at the medieval closet of shame. Silk, too luxurious. Banned for most. Fur, only allowed if you made good money, and not just any fur. Ermine and squirrel fur were strictly noble. Velvet, frowned upon unless you were a merchant with cash and connections. Bright colors, especially purple, red, and deep blue, those dyes were expensive. Jewels, forbidden for commoners, even wearing fake gems could get you fined. Feathers, a peacock feather in your hat, arrest-worthy if you didn't have status, which is rough, because honestly, feathers are fabulous. England said no in 1363. King Edward III of England got fed up. People were getting too stylish. Merchants were outdressing knights. Butchers were dressing like barons. So he passed along dramatic law banning certain clothes for each class. Servants could only wear wool under a certain value. Craftsmen couldn't wear silver, gold, or velvet. Farmers were required to wear russet cloth, basically brown sackway fabric. Women were scolded for wearing excessively long trains and tight bodices. The law ended by reminding everyone that God had placed them in their class for a reason. So, dress like it. Yikes. Fashion spies and fines. But how were these laws enforced? Well, people told on each other. A lot. Fashion snitches were real. If your neighbor saw you stepping out in a suspiciously shiny tunic, they might file a complaint with the local authorities. Then came the fines. Some laws said offenders had to pay a hefty fee. Others had them publicly shamed, or forced to remove the garment in public. You'd think people would tone it down. But fashion, even then, was resistance. The weird had crisis. Let's talk hats. In the late 1300s, European fashion saw the rise of something called the hanen, a tall, cone-shaped hat worn by noble women. Think of a fancy wizard's hat, but for rich ladies. Sometimes it had a little veil flowing from the top, like a bridal flag. They got very tall, some over 2 feet high. Commoners tried to copy the style, and, as you may guess, sumptuary laws swooped in. Towns banned hanens for non-nobles. Some cities even tried to limit hat height. Imagine being told your hat was too tall by law. There were also rules about men's hats, especially the wide-brimmed and feathered varieties. A well-placed feather was a social statement, but only certain classes could wear certain birds. Imagine going to court and being told, "Sorry, sir, only knights may wear hair and feathers. Yours is strictly duck." Sneaky stitching. Of course, people found ways to cheat the system. They used fake linings, so the fur was on the inside and couldn't be seen. They wore cheaper versions of banned fabrics. They dyed wool to look like silk. They smuggled sleeves. Yes, sleeves. Some clothes had removable sleeves, and nobles would sell just the sleeves to lower-class folks who wanted a taste of luxury. Just a velvet sleeves hanging off a plain tunic. Very chic, very illegal. Did these laws work? Short answer, not really. People kept pushing boundaries. The more you banned, the more people wanted it. Fashion became an act of rebellion, especially among the growing merchant class, who had money but no title. And in the end, enforcing fashion rules just became expensive, annoying, and kind of ridiculous. By the 1600s, most sumptuary laws had fizzled out. People still judged each other, of course, but legally, your hat could be as ridiculous as your heart desired. Bedtime wardrobe check as you lie in bed. Think of what you're wearing. Maybe it's soft pajamas. Maybe a well-worn t-shirt. Maybe just fuzzy socks and a blanket burrito. Now imagine someone measuring your sleeve and saying, "Sorry, too cozy. That's noble comfort. You'll need to change." Yeah, the past was weird. So tonight, wear your fluffiest robe, your silkiest socks, your peacock-feathered sleep mask, if you have one. Reclaim the power that was once banned by law. Trial by combat and other weird justice. Welcome back, gentle dreamer. Tonight, we explore the ancient halls of medieval justice, where truth wasn't always found in scrolls or witness testimony, but in duels, burns, and bread stuck in your throat. In this chapter, we look at a world where the courtroom was sometimes a battlefield, and where divine intervention was considered the ultimate lie detector. So lie back, get comfy, and don't worry. No one will ask you to duel before dawn. Let's begin. When the sword spoke louder than words. Let's start with the most dramatic of them all, trial by combat. This wasn't some metaphorical phrase. In many parts of medieval Europe, if someone accused you of a serious crime, like murder, theft, or treason, you could demand a duel to settle the matter? Yes, a literal fight, to people. One accusation, one set of very angry weapons. The idea was simple and slightly terrifying. Whoever won was declared innocent, because clearly God helped them win. And the loser, guilty, or thus very bad at sword fighting. It wasn't always fair, no. You might be thinking, but what if one person is a trained knight and the other is a 67-year-old baker with arthritis? Good question. Medieval courts had a few rules. If someone clearly wasn't fit to fight, they could hire a champion, someone to fight on their behalf. These champions were basically medieval lawyers. with swords, but still, it wasn't great. Wealthy people could hire experienced fighters. Poor people often had to roll the dice, or sharpen their own pitchfork. Justice by combat, 50% law, 50% very bad idea, the dual pit of doom in Germany. The rules for trial by combat got weirdly specific. In one version, if a man accused a woman of something serious, and she demanded combat, they'd fight in a duel pit, a circular arena dug into the ground. The man had to fight with one arm tied behind his back. The woman was allowed to use a rock in a sling or a weighted cloth. The pit was small and sandy. Think gladiator fight in someone's backyard sandbox. And yes, people really came to watch. Let that sink in. Somewhere in medieval Europe, people bought snacks, sat down, and watched Granny fight Gary from the bakery. Trial by ordeal. Not feeling strong enough to duel. Well, there was another charming option. Trial by ordeal. In this version, you didn't fight someone, you suffered something, and if you survived, God was clearly on your side. Here are a few delightful examples. Ordeal by fire. You had to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set number of steps. Then, your burned hands were bandaged for 3 days. After that, a priest would inspect the wounds, healing Nestle, innocent. Still gross and blistered, guilty. So basically, medieval science meets divine vibes. Ordeal by water. This one involved tossing the accused into a body of water, usually a river or pond. But here's the catch. If you floated, you were guilty because the water rejected you. If you sank, you were innocent but possibly drowned. It was a lose-lose situation. And no, they didn't always tie a rope around your waist. So sometimes, justice meant floating to prison or sinking to heaven. Ordeal by bread. Yes, bread. This one was typically used for priests and monks who weren't allowed to fight or bleed. The accused would be asked to eat a piece of bread and cheese. If they choked or had trouble swallowing, they were considered guilty, because that meant God was tightening their throat. So if you had anxiety, allergies, or just really dry mouth. Bad news. Witchcraft. Try ordeal by swimming. Accused of being a witch, you'd likely face the water test. You'd be tied up and tossed into water. If you floated, they said the water rejected you, because witches were believed to be made of evil. If you sank, congrats, you weren't a witch, you were just underwater. Some towns actually recorded these trials in detail. The whole village would gather at a pond, cheer, and point. It was less of a legal process, and more of a morbid pool party. Eventually, we grew out of it. The late medieval period. These ordeals began to lose popularity, especially after the 13th century, when the church started stepping back from such tests. People began to favor more evidence-based trials, with witnesses and paperwork instead of water buckets and iron rods. Trial by combat lingered a little longer, though. The last known legal duel in Europe happened in France in 1386, and it involved, no surprise, a grudge, a sword, and a crowd. But eventually, even the most stubborn towns said, maybe we should stop throwing people into lakes to see if they're innocent. Progress, bedtime, and just to see as you drift off to sleep. Think of how lucky you are. If someone accuses you of stealing their goat, you don't have to fight them with a stick. If you say something sketchy, no one hands you a flaming iron rod. And if your bread gets stuck in your throat, people offer water, not prison. The medieval world was wild. But hey, at least now we know. In the court of the Middle Ages, your sword, your lungs, and your lunch could all be used against you. Bloodletting, leeches, and medieval medicine. Welcome back. Dear dreamer, tonight we drift into the candlelit corners of medieval hospitals and herb gardens, where doctors carried knives, monks made potions, and nobody really understood germs. Because in the Middle Ages, medicine was part science, part magic, and a big part please don't sneeze on me. So take a deep breath, let your limbs go limp, and let's float into the wonderfully weird world of medieval medicine. First, some context. In the Middle Ages, most people didn't know how the human body actually worked. They didn't have x-rays, or microscopes, or even a real concept of infection. No one had discovered bacteria yet. The idea of invisible germs, blasphemy. Instead, people believed illness came from bad air, unbalanced humors, or God being mildly annoyed at you honestly if you sneezed 3 times in a row. Someone nearby probably whispered a prayer for your soul. The 4 humors at the heart of medieval medicine was the theory of the 4 humors. No, not funny humor. These were the body juices that allegedly controlled everything about you. They were blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If those 4 things weren't perfectly balanced, you were in trouble. Too much blood, you might be too cheerful or hyper. Too much black bile, probably moody and constipated. Too much phlegm, lazy and slow. Too much yellow bile, angry and sweaty. Medieval doctors looked at your personality and your illness, and then tried to drain, purge, or balance your juices. Comforting, right? Bloodletting, because why not? The go-to treatment for everything from fever to headaches to bad energy was bloodletting. That meant draining your blood, on purpose. Doctors believed it helped restore balance. Feeling weak? Let's make you weaker. They used knives, lances, or our favorite, leeches. They'd open up a vein, let the blood drip into a bowl, and keep going until you looked pale and balanced, or unconscious. And this wasn't just for serious illnesses. Got the sniffles? Better bleed that out, my friend. Bring in the leeches. Let's talk about leeches, nature's little vampires. In medieval Europe, leeches were prized for their ability to suck out bad blood. You could buy them at markets. Some monks even kept little leech jars in the infirmary. Doctors would place them on your arms, neck, or even behind your ears. Then they'd just wait until the leech got full and fell off like a very bloated raisin. Honestly, it's kind of adorable and disgusting at the same time. But hey, if you had a medieval fever, you were probably desperate enough to try anything, even a face full of medical slugs. Not all herbs and horrors, to be fair. Not everything was bloody and bizarre. Medieval medicine also included herbal remedies and natural treatments that sometimes actually worked. Willow bark was used for pain, and it contains a compound similar to aspirin. Garlic and honey were used to clean wounds. Mint, lavender, and chamomile were prescribed for stress and stomach aches. Elderberry syrup, still used today. So yes, not every doctor was a juice-obsessed vampire. Some were gentle healers with pockets full of lavender, especially in monasteries, where monks carefully copied medical texts and grew herb gardens to treat the sick. Plague panic then came. The Black Death. In the 1300s, Europe was hit by one of the deadliest pandemics in history. The bubonic plague swept through towns, killing millions. And guess what? People still didn't know about germs. So they blamed bad smells and Saturn. Foreigners, cats, you name it. Doctors were terrifying plague masks shaped like long bird beaks, stuffed with herbs to protect them from the bad air. They looked like gothic crows doing amateur cosplay. Treatments included burning fragrant herbs, drinking vinegar, popping pus-filled boils, please don't running far away. It wasn't very effective, but it was very dramatic. Surgery without the screaming. Not real surgery did exist in the Middle Ages, but it was rare, risky, and definitely unpleasant. There was no anesthesia, just a leather strap to bite, a strong drink, or a few prayers. Amputations were quick and brutal. Skull surgeries were performed using hand drills, and tools were sterilized by, well, they weren't. Surgeons were often barbers too. Hence the classic red and white barber pole. Red for blood, white for bandages. So, if you wanted a haircut, and maybe a quick leg amputation, medieval barbers had you covered. Astrology, urine, and hope medicine wasn't just about herbs and bloodletting. Doctors also used astrology. Your treatment might depend on the position of Mars and the Moon. Urine charts, your pee's color, smell, and vibe were considered diagnostic gold. Prayer and penance. Illness might be a spiritual punishment, so confession was part of the healing process. In fact, medieval doctors might have asked to smell your urine before asking how you felt. Honestly, that's dedication. And yet, people survive as strange as it sounds. Some medieval medical practices helped. Clean bandages, herbal balms, and warm broths offered real comfort. Monks and nuns cared for the sick with compassion. Midwives passed down generations of healing wisdom. Even among the leeches and lancets, there was love, learning, and a desire to help, which is kind of beautiful. Strange superstitions and daily life magic. Welcome back, sleepy traveler. You've made it through the sword fights, the leeches, and the plague masks. And now it's time for something a little more mystical. Tonight, we tiptoe into the world of superstition and folk magic, the everyday kind. The little rituals, charms, and whispered beliefs that helped medieval folks feel just a tiny bit safer in a world full of storms, sickness, and smelly cheese. Because back then, everything had a meaning. A black cat, a crooked chimney, a spoon that fell the wrong way. It all meant something. So close your eyes, grab your favorite lucky blanket, and let's wander through the oddly magical daily life of medieval Europe. The world was full of signs. The Middle Ages, people didn't separate the natural from the supernatural. Everything, and I mean everything, was connected. A sneeze might be a message from God. A sudden breeze could mean a spirit was nearby. And if your cow looked at you funny. Well, something was probably cursed. People believed the world was full of invisible forces, good and bad, and they needed to be careful not to offend them, because bad luck. That stuff was serious business. Shoes, salt, and scissors. Let's start with some fun little superstitions. Never put your shoes on the table. It invited death into the house. Also, it's just rude. Spilling salt, terrible luck. But if you threw a pinch over your left shoulder, it would blind the devil sneaking up behind you. Hanging scissors over the door, that protected you from witches and evil spirits. Also, it was handy in case you needed to cut some yarn. And don't even think about breaking a mirror, not because of bad luck, but because mirrors were believed to reflect your soul. Break one, and, well, you might have just cracked your destiny. No pressure. Magic in the Hometh medieval home was full of little magical tricks. People hung horseshoes above the door to ward off bad spirits. Garlic wasn't just for flavor. It protected you from sickness and vampires. A bowl of herbs and stones might sit on the windowsill to keep the house clean, spiritually speaking. And if your baby wouldn't stop crying, someone might slip a charm or amulet into their blanket to soothe the evil away. No one knew exactly how it worked, but hey, If Grandma said it worked, it worked. Love charms and tooth fairy vibes people didn't just use magic for protection, they used it for love. Want someone to fall for you? Bake a little love cake with special herbs. Yes, sometimes a few drops of blood were added. Ooh, want to break a curse? You might bury your lover's sock in the yard. Want to attract a husband? Toss apple peels over your shoulder. The peel would supposedly land in the shape of your future husband's initials, and losing a tooth. That had its own rituals too. Kids were told to throw the tooth into the fire or hide it in a wall crack, to avoid attracting evil mice or goblins. No coins under pillows, though that idea came much later. Witches, fairies, and the five folk people believed they shared their world with invisible beings, and they took it very seriously. Witches were feared and respected. Some were thought to cast curses, others to heal with herbs. Fairies weren't cute little bugs with wings. In medieval times, they were wild, unpredictable, and not to be messed with. People left offerings, milk, bread, or shiny coins, to keep the fairies happy. Stepping into a fairy ring, a circle of mushrooms, was dangerous. You might disappear, dance forever, or come back with your hair turned white. Honestly, the fairies had zero chill. Disease and bad luck. Must be a hex if your crops failed, your horse went missing, or your eyebrows fell out. You didn't blame weather or diet. You blamed a curse. Maybe someone gave you the evil eye, or a jealous neighbor buried a dead frog under your doorstep. That was a real thing. To break a hex, people tried all sorts of things. Carrying a dead mole in your pocket, gross. Drinking boiled eggs, extra gross. Or visiting a cunning man or wise woman. Folk healers who mixed herbs, prayers, and a touch of stage magic to help. Basically, medieval therapy was just a little witchy. Church versus superstitiono. The church did not love all this magical stuff. They preferred prayers, saints, and holy water, not apple peel love spells or upside-down brooms. But the truth is, regular people did both. They'd go to church on Sunday, pray for good weather, and then go home and bury a dried toad behind the barn, less to be safe. Call it spiritual multitasking. Sleep spells and dream portals. Even sleep had its own magical rules. People believed dreams were messages from heaven, hell, or the subconscious. If you dreamed of water, it might mean someone was gossiping about you. If you dreamed of teeth falling out, that meant someone in your family might be in trouble. To protect yourself during sleep, people tied herbs like rosemary or juniper near the bed, placed iron knives under their pillows to scare off night spirits, slept facing east, the direction of the sunrise, and safety. So as you lie in bed now, you're actually continuing a very long tradition of using bedtime to connect with the magical unknown, just with fewer frogs. The outlaws. When the law kicked you out, welcome back, brave sleeper. Tonight, we're going to whisper about the ones who lived outside the walls. The rule breakers, the misfits, the folks who didn't quite fit into medieval society, or who were forcibly removed from it. Yes, it's time to talk about outlaws, not the Hollywood kind with sunglasses and 6-shooters. We're talking about medieval outlaws, people who were literally declared outside the protection of the law, and once that happened, well, life got very interesting and a little drafty. So pull up your blanket, pretend it's a cloak, and let's go wandering through the forests and moors of medieval Europe, where the outlaws roamed. What exactly is an outlaw? Let's clear something up. In the Middle Ages, being an outlaw didn't necessarily mean you were a criminal. It meant the law had basically looked at you and said, you know what? You're on your own. Good luck out there. To be outlawed meant you had no legal rights. No trial, no protection, no way to buy bread without risk. Anyone could harm you, even kill you, and not get in trouble for it. It was like being ghosted. But by the entire legal system. How did you become an outlaw? There were a few ways to get outlawed, and some were surprisingly petty. Skipping court when summoned, outlawed. Not paying a fine, outlawed. Annoying a noble, just a bit too much, you guessed it, outlawed. Stealing a loaf of bread one too many times, boom, outlaw. Sometimes, people weren't even criminals. They just couldn't make it to court on time because, well, they lived 60 miles away and had no horse. It wasn't always justice. Sometimes, it was just geography. Life on the run-ins, outlawed. You couldn't go home, couldn't shop in the village, couldn't even stay at an inn. So where did you go? Mostly, the woods, the forest became your new neighborhood. Your bed, moss and leaves, your neighbors, foxes, outlaws, and very suspicious squirrels. Some outlaws teamed up and formed little camps, kind of like medieval versions of off-grid communes. They hunted, scavenged, and sometimes robbed travelers, but only the rich ones. You know, too, keep things morally flexible. Robin Hood vibe. Speaking of forest outlaws, let's talk about the legend of Robin Hood. Was he real? Maybe. Was he outlawed? Definitely. According to the stories, Robin was a nobleman turned outlaw who robbed the rich, helped the poor, wore fabulous green outfits, and had a band of merry men who somehow always had clean hair. Robin Hood was basically medieval Europe's favorite fantasy outlaw. The idea that justice could still exist outside the law. He wasn't the only one, either. Every region had its own Robin-style legend. It made people feel like there was hope, even when the actual justice system was, let's say, very creative. Outlaws had rules to vent if you were outside the law. That didn't mean total chaos. Outlaw bands often had their own unofficial codes. Share food, don't turn on each other, no hurting villagers, absolutely no stealing someone else's goat, a serious offense. They had to cooperate to survive. Food was scarce, winters were brutal, and sometimes the forest had more wolves than apples. Outlaws weren't all criminals. Some were just poor, or desperate, or wrongly accused. Others were actually very guilty, but weirdly polite. Women as outlawship. Outlaw women existed too. They were rarer, but they show up in the records. Some were wives who helped their outlaw husbands, healers, or herbalists accused of witchcraft, or us folks who said no thanks to an arranged marriage and ran off. These women lived rough, just like the men, hiding in woods, evading sheriffs, and trying to stay warm under stolen sheep cloaks. One famous tale tells of a woman who escaped prison, joined a band of outlaws, and became their leader. She was known for her clever traps, fast feet, and suspiciously good stew. Honestly, iconic. The forest law, yes, that was a thing. Now here's something very medieval. Forest law. In royal forests, everything, trees, animals, acorns, belonged to the king. So if you hunted a deer or even gathered firewood without permission, you were breaking forest law. That meant fines, imprisonment, or, you guessed it, outlawry. So even surviving in the woods could be illegal. This led to some awkward moments like, "Sir, are you eating a squirrel?" No, this is a forest turnip." Outlaws and the church played a weird double role. On one hand, it supported the law. On the other hand, it had sanctuary rights. If you were an outlaw and made it to a church or monastery, you could claim sanctuary, like medieval base in a game of tag. The authorities weren't allowed to drag you out. You could stay safe for up to 40 days. What happened after 40 days? Well, you had to either face trial, go into exile, or become a monk. Honestly, not a bad career pivot. The end of the outlaw array over time. Laws changed, police forces grew, justice systems became more organized and slightly less about dumping people in forests. By the 1500s, outlawry started to fade away. It was replaced by jail time, fines, and more formal courts. Still not perfect, but better than good. Luck and goodbye. But the legend of the outlaw lived on in songs, in stories, in sleepy bedtime documentaries. Centuries later, the absurd trials and punishments that make no sense. Well, hello again, sleepy listener. You've made it this far through the wacky world of medieval Europe, from nose-taxing nobles to garlic-wielding villagers. But before we close the parchment on this sleepy story, there's one more chapter we simply must explore: the absurd, the ridiculous, and the downright confusing side of medieval justice. Tonight, we're talking about the trials and punishments that made absolutely zero sense, yet somehow were 100% real. So tuck yourself in. This is the part of the bedtime story where you might laugh, sigh, and whisper, "Wait. They did what? Trial by cheese?" Yep. Let's start with one of my favorites, trial by food. In some parts of medieval Europe, if someone was accused of a crime, but there wasn't enough evidence, they were made to undergo a holy test. One version was called the ordeal of consecrated bread and cheese. Here's how it worked. The accused was given a slice of blessed cheese and a chunk of blessed bread. They had to eat it without choking. If they choked, it was a sign from God that they were guilty. If they swallowed it fine, they were declared innocent. Yes, friends, guilt, decided by snack. Medieval justice was one holy hiccup away from total disaster. Trial by water. Yes, water. Not just for bathing once a season. This was one of the most common forms of God will sorted out justice. There were two main kinds. Cold water ordeal. The accused was tied up and tossed into a body of cold water. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent. Though, let's be honest, they often sank a little too well. Hot water ordeal. The accused had to stick their hand in a pot of boiling water to retrieve a stone. Then they'd bandage the hand and wait 3 days. If the burn looked clean and healing, innocent. If it was festering, guilty, because nothing says fair trial like boiling someone's hand. Let's talk about trial by combat. We've all seen the movies. 2 knights, swords drawn, clashing for honor. But in real life, trial by combat wasn't always so glamorous. You could challenge someone to a duel to prove you were right. Or, if you were accused of something, you could request a fight to prove your innocence. And yes, God was supposed to help the innocent party win. What's wild is that this even applied to peasants, not just nobles. Don't have armor. No problem. Grab a club, say a prayer, and hope for the best. In one famous case, a husband accused his wife of witchcraft, and they were ordered to duel. She was allowed to fight with a rock and a sock. He had to stand in a pit with one arm tied. Yes, that actually happened. Animal trials? Yes. Really? No. Here's where it gets completely bananas. Medieval courts sometimes put animals on trial. No, not metaphorically. I mean actual pigs, cows, roosters, and even bugs. Some examples. In 1386, a pig was put on trial in France for murdering a child. It was found guilty and executed. In 1474, a rooster was tried for laying an egg. which was seen as a sign of the devil. Swarms of weevils and rats were summoned to court and given formal warnings to leave the area, or else. Can you imagine a courtroom with a judge yelling at a beetle? Because somewhere in Europe, that totally happened. The shame parody: if you were lucky enough to avoid boiling water or flying cheese, you might get a punishment that involved deep public embarrassment. Some examples: stocks and pillories, where your head and hands were locked in place, and passers-by could throw old vegetables at you. Carrots, the medieval dodgeball. Ducking stools, where gossipy women, yes, really were dunked into rivers repeatedly. Walking backwards through town, wearing ridiculous signs like liar or pig thief. Honestly, it was like medieval reality TV, but wetter. The pointy hat that wasn't magical, no. Not the wizard kind. This was a real punishment in some areas, making someone wear a tall, ridiculous hat in public, sometimes covered in bells, sometimes shaped like a donkey's head. It was called a cap of shame. Imagine being forced to walk through town wearing a party hat that screams, "I borrowed a chicken," without asking. Yeah, shame. Fashion was serious business. Branding and mutilation. Okay, let's take a tiny step into the darker stuff. Some punishments left a permanent mark. Literally, branding someone's forehead or hand with a hot iron. Letters like T for thief. Chopping off ears or noses for repeat offenders. Even tongue removal for slander. Harsh, huh? These were meant to make it easy for others to see your crime. A sort of walking medieval rap sheet. Luckily, not all towns went this extreme, but when they did, whew, let's just say I'm glad we have parking tickets now instead. Crimes that sound fake, but aren't some actual punishable offenses from medieval records. Being too loud in church, you could get fined. Wearing clothes above your social class. Illegal fashion was real. Idle wandering. Basically, walking with no obvious purpose. Dancing after dark, seen as suspicious. Stealing someone's pigeon. Not their money, their pigeon. Justice was sometimes more about keeping up appearances than actual fairness, and heaven help you if you were caught plowing your neighbor's field without permission. That was like a medieval turf war. Sweet dreams of saner times. So, here we are, the end of the journey. From animal trials to boiling water to cheese-based guilt. It's safe to say, medieval justice was weird. And while we can chuckle at how strange it seems now, it also reminds us how far we've come. You no longer have to duel a stranger to prove you didn't steal a goat. And if your bread makes you choke, no one's calling the sheriff. Tonight, your only trial is finding the coziest spot in bed, and your only punishment is having to wake up in the morning. So rest well, noble dreamer. You have passed the trial of staying awake through 15 chapters of wonderfully boring, beautifully strange medieval history. Good night, and may your dreams be free of weevils, ducks, and floating tests.